right.
Great.
We'll wait for some people to catch up to get here. People joining right now. But I will get started. I am Jordan Zachrin. I am the writer, publisher, and everything, I guess, at Progress Report. I'm with, and I realize that I have a last name that some people pronounce. No one gets it right, and so I feel terrible in saying I don't like Roth.
Oh, you had it. So you should have
Roth.
stuck with your
Roth.
instinct. It's
Roth.
Roath.
Okay.
Yes, it's
I
it's
was
like oath with an R in front of it. Yeah.
that's what I thought. And like I said, like my last name, no one gets it right, so I have to be good to people with the last names. But Patrick Roath, who is running for Congress in Massachusetts' 8th district. There's a Democrat there already, and he's primarying him. Stephen Lynch has been there 24 years, and now Patrick said that's enough. Time for a new generation of people. And so you're running, and I like to talk with people who are running in primaries because that's something I've been big on since I started this newsletter in 2018. And sometimes I can't even describe why. I just like we need new people. We need new people in office. We need new
Right.
perspectives. We need young people. And so I can say I think we're the same age, 39. So I can say young. Okay, cool. So thank you for being here. Big night. I know it's the State of the Union. So we'll make sure that you get a chance to watch it. I know you're excited to watch.
Sure. Yeah. It's like I used to, even if it were the other party's president. It was important part of the country's sort of fabric. And now it's just like I just can't even bring myself, you know?
We hear from him so much. I don't feel like
Yeah.
I'm going to learn anything new.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And I can say this is part of the media. There's going to be relentless media coverage, so I don't really need to watch it. So it's like 2.5 hours of my life that not sure I'm going to use it well, but I'm not going to use it watching that.
Yeah.
You're also a new dad, which
That's true. I'll tell you what I'll be using that time to do, which is
yeah,
probably trying to get my newborn daughter to bed. It's probably without some success, but that's like a big thing going on in our household right now. So
how old's your daughter now?
she is just kind of closing in on 10 weeks.
Oh
So
wow,
we're kind of, going through a fussy stage. And we're starting to have some longer stretches of sleep at night, which is really,
that's awesome.
really welcome.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
I got to. So Patrick is running for the 8th district in Manhattan. He's running against Stephen Lynch. And I have a 3-year-old,
Oh, do
and
you? Okay, good.
so I don't know how you decided to run before you had the kid. I imagine. Did you have any idea how tired you would be? How exhausted you would
Yeah,
be?
no is the short answer to that. But we found out we'll get to the campaign eventually. We found out the gender of our daughter on launch day. So
Oh wow.
we kind of knew what we were in for. And these things that you can't totally program them out. And we're just kind of like, let's rock and roll. It's gonna be a crazy year.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can survive the first year of raising a kid, then you can go to Congress. Um, so you are running. So Stephen Lynch, he is running. I mean, he's been there for 24 years since like basically 2000. I think he got elected or so, something like that. He's probably at the State of the Union. So is that somewhere you would go if you were in office? Would you attend?
I think not at this point. And that, that kind of bugs me to say that, because I've spent time in DC. I believe in our institutions. I would like to think that there's a part of our commitment to civic tradition that rises above partisan kind of bickering. But today and tonight, like, why? Like, I'm not sure that I'd feel like I was, I'd be worried that I was sort of conveying my tacit support for what's
Mm.
happening and sort of like almost providing more legitimacy by attending the State of the Union that's being offered by this would be authoritarian.
I think a lot about, especially so I've been covering politics for a little while now, since 2018 or so. And, during the Biden administration, there was all this talk about institutions, right? Like how we need to preserve the institution, the Supreme Court, we need the institution of filibuster and all that. And, those things, I guess, stood. But now it seems like people defending institutions are almost like you said, defending an authoritarianism in a way.
Well, I mean, did they stand, right? I mean, they're being tested in ways that we've never seen in this country right now. And I'd love to be able to just kind of get a big bear hug around him and protect him. And I think we saw that in the Biden administration. And it didn't work, right? And partly because the other side has an argument about how those institutions aren't serving anyone anymore, and therefore they're not worth it. And we need to take that seriously. They're not right about everything, but they are right about some things, about how our government really has failed a lot of people and how the entrenched political class in Washington on both sides of the aisle has not done the job that they needed to do. And like, there's something to that. And I think as Democrats, especially people who are challengers, who are trying to come up in the party and push people in the right direction, I think we need to take that very seriously and talk about it more.
100%. No, I've been interviewing since I started doing this, interviewing people who are running in primaries. And sometimes, they're running against, more conservative Democrats or running against moderates, people who've been there a long time. Sometimes I can't really even put my finger on it, like why I think there should be primaries, but that idea of not, this institution is not working for people, right? It's just
Yeah.
that something needs to fundamentally change. And I'm curious, you worked, like you said, you worked in DC, so you spent some time there. I know you worked for Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts. What was the thing that made you say, hey, you know what, like Stephen Lynch isn't working for us?
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I kind of decided that about a year ago, and that was after we'd lost the 2024 election, and I was so profoundly disappointed in the outcome, but also in the failure of my party to offer an optimistic, affirmative vision of the future that people could clearly get behind and get excited about. I felt that about Democrats generally, and then looking at my own congressman, he's the last Democrat left in D.C. who voted against the Affordable Care Act. Around that time last year, he was the only member of the Massachusetts delegation who voted against the Lake and Riley or voted for the Lake and Riley Act, which I thought was a total betrayal of our values and
Right.
sort of a naive codification of what the Trump administration was doing with ICE and preparing to do to our communities. And it became obvious that this guy hadn't had a town hall in person since 2019, and he had a really troubling record on a lot of things, and just was not leading on the issues I cared about. And so it was those things coming together that convinced me, like, maybe I should just kind of quit my job and jump into this and try to offer something that's different and more passionate and urgent and more suited to these really scary times that we're in.
He's an interesting throwback in a way, right? He's very, very blue collar, which is cool. And very like he was union came up through that, and he has like a conservative South Boston type aspect to him, but it feels like sometimes the district has moved a little bit away from him in that time.
I think that's right. And look, and it's not a personal thing. He's a very decent man, and it's not, this is not by any means a animus attack on him. He's been in Congress for almost 25 years. He's been a politician for about as long as I've been alive. So, he's mostly been doing that. I do think our communities have changed a lot. And I just think that the challenges that we're facing today are just kind of different than what you might have had 25 years ago, right? And it just calls for a different kind of leadership and a kind of thinking. And I think people are kind of get that right in our communities. I think they kind of see that now, even if they don't, dislike him. They're just ready for something different.
Yeah, it's funny. Democrats for a long time were not really that big on change in that regard. Republicans have often been like throw the guys out. Let's start new. Let's have a bloodletting. But it feels like Democratic voters, I should say, are finally. We've seen like I'm in New York, so we saw lots of that happen with AOC, and we saw legislative changes happening. So it's happened. There's been some, but I feel like this year is really the year that like you timed it right.
I just think that I can really only speak to our district, but I see it nationally as well. I think that there's some pent up appetite for change and some urgency around that. And I think that it has to do with our national political climate. It has to do with 2024 and everything that happened at the presidential level. But it also has to do with we've just got a lot of members who are Democrats who have been there a long, long time and don't really seem to a lot of voters like they reflect what they need and understand their experiences.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think a lot about like structural changes. So for you, like you go to Congress, right? What are the things that you think fundamentally need to change in this country? Like
Yeah.
whether it's corporate power, whether it's obviously you were a big voting rights guy, so that's a big thing we need to fix. But like, what are the things that like underlying it all? We can talk about individual policies, which I want to do, but like to you, what are the biggest things ailing the country?
Yeah, good. And that's kind of where I started with my own career, right? So I was the chair of Common Cause Massachusetts here in Boston, in the Boston area, and did a lot of work in the voting rights space and trying to get voting rights laws fixed here. Worked on campaign finance reform because of that conviction that I think it's a structural problem that needs a structural solution. We need more people getting involved in our government, not because that's good per se, but really more because um, that's how we are going to get people to buy back into the idea of this country. And that is how we're going to prove to people who are losing to Trump, right, and losing to MAGA that this is a country that can still work for them. I think that that has to do with a bunch of discrete policies flow from that, things that are going to help people and help working families. But we're never going to get that stuff done unless we fix our politics, unless we detract, if we get corporate money out of there, if we change the structural impediments that are making it harder for people to run for the first time and get involved in these seats and have young people step up. So, for me, like the set of things, like I've got my long wish list, but the things that I think are doable and I think are really salient are term limits, right? Which I would not have started with a couple of years ago, but I really feel strongly about
Just
now.
yeah,
Campaign finance reform, at a minimum, we should do more to, kind of chip away at Citizens United, right? But we really need public financing of elections, right? That would actually make a huge difference if we could have more and more states opt into that and federally support that. There's all sorts of things we could do at the Supreme Court level that would be huge. Pass voting rights reform, make it harder to gerrymander. Like that's huge for me, right? And
yeah,
it's
common cause,
all in the
right?
service. It's not just for fun. It's in the service of fixing government so it can provide better outcomes for people so that we can prove that it works and get people confident again.
It's funny you mentioned term limits, and it's something that like I mean, there's obviously a reason why a lot of people haven't Democrats haven't supported them because they have been expired terms have been expired a long time ago. But it's something that I've heard more and more lately, and
Yeah, me too.
it's interesting, and I wonder like what it had you always been in favor of that, or is it something that you came to later, and where do you think the benefit is?
No, not at all, because it's not in our constitution, right? And there is value to having people serve in Washington who know what they're doing, who like get a sense to who like understand their colleagues and understand the institutions. Like that's good. But I don't know. I've come to this view that the structural protections for incumbents are so strong that like you need a mechanism to force people out and force new people to get in, right? And that's the kind of lifeblood of our country that actually keeps it vital and healthy. And I'll say like even at the beginning of the campaign, I just heard it so much, and I saw so many heads now when I started to talk about it that I really it's connected with me as well. And it's something that I care more and more about. Now it's hard to do. I would self-impose it, of course, but it's hard to do because you
Sure.
have to amend the Constitution to make it to codify it.
Yeah, and it's tough because a lot of people don't want to give up their power, as we've
Yeah,
seen.
that's the bigger
Um,
issue.
yeah. So in terms of like running against an incumbent and also the things that entrench them, right? You've done a really good job raising money. I know Steve Lynch had a lot of money left from all his campaigns. Probably wouldn't have much competition through most of the years, so it's easy to pile up. But in terms of like when you're running, and I think a lot of people like if they follow politics, they don't necessarily like realize how entrenched people are when the incumbent is. So like what kind of things like that you like kind of discovered? I know you obviously worked
Hmm.
for Deval Patrick, so you understood politics already, but in terms of like how hard it is to displace just like to structurally displace somebody like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, part of it's the money. I mean, part of it is apathy, right? There is just a list, and you got to start there because, like, there's just a lot of people who go about their day and they're like, "I'm in Massachusetts. It's a blue state. We're insulated from some of this stuff. We've got a congressman whose name starts with a D. I don't care, right?"
Right.
And you have to. There's a real effort to show people, like, "Hey, no, like." First of all, we could just be doing better. We could have someone who's committed to this job, who understands our communities, who has a young family, who's like just has like energy to go wild in there and like really try to change things up. Like that's healthy. And you're not being that well served right now by someone who hasn't gotten a lot done. And the things he has done, you might not agree with. Right. So overcoming apathy is just the biggest thing. And, that's not necessarily structural, but it is a reflection of our politics right now that people don't believe that change is real. So there's that, and then there is the structural things, the things that make it easy to stay there once you've been there a while. Corporate pack. There's just transactional money that flows through the system, and it flows only exclusively to incumbents, right? For DC reasons, and that makes it a lot easier to stay in office. But I'll say, very proud that we outraised the congressman last year quite significantly. We did that without taking any back checks whatsoever. He raised a fraction of what we did, and it was just almost completely PAC money. So there's a real difference in enthusiasm there, and we think we're going to have what we need to be competitive. And we're still, if anyone wants to help out, we'd love to have their help.
Well, and I live in New York City, right? And so a lot of the last year has been well, I mean now the mayor's race is obviously over, but it was Cuomo coming back and this idea that, and I'm not comparing Lynch and Cuomo, but this idea that people have been there a really long time, right? And like there is this element of like, well, we got to go with him because he's the one with the power. He's the one that we
Yeah,
think's going to win. He's
yeah,
the one. So a lot of unions who like much of my job is covering unions, so I'm all 100%. like with them, but like there was this element of we're going to go with him because he seems like the sure thing, or he's the one with the power, he's the one who knows where, or I don't know, where the bodies are buried. So that's got to be very tough, also to just kind of that structural.
And like there's a natural institutional inertia to these things that power begets power, and but like you've seen it in New York, right? Like when you have a message and you have people when you're able to reach people, and it's timed the right way, you can break through that, and that's why that's what gives me some hope that this thing of ours still works, and like we've been able to, we've been endorsed by Governor Deval Patrick, which I'm really proud of, endorsed by David Hogg's group, Leaders We Deserve.
Right.
There's like a growing list of local people on the ground, elected officials who are endorsing us. So, we're chipping away at that and we're trying to make our argument. And I think people are increasingly listening.
One of the things that you mentioned here, obviously, and you've made a big part of your campaign is the Lincoln Riley Act and the vote to fund ICE. And that's the sort of thing that like you wonder, I don't know, Steve knows better than I do. Like, where do you think that comes from, that desire to do that? Because I can't imagine people I know there's some very conservative elements of Boston. I'm not saying it's all Harvard, but there's some very conservative elements of it. But where do you think a vote like that comes from? Just not understanding really where the public is, or just entrenched.
You'd have to ask him, right? And I wouldn't speak for him. I think that there was to me, it reflects a certain naivete about what the Republicans and the Trump administration were about to do with the immigration enforcement in this country, right? And I think that there was like a very concerted, let's put it this way. There was a suggestion that, it's time to moderate on immigration policy. And like, let's give the Republicans a little bit of what they're asking for, right? Because we need to look like we're moderating on immigration policy. And I understand that impulse. However, everyone else in the Massachusetts delegation, other than Congressman Lynch, understood what was about to happen in this country and what they were going to do in the name of immigration enforcement. Look, they named it after a victim who had an awful, disgusting crime committed against her, right? In an attempt to generate sympathy. And of course, no one wants people who are committing crimes who are not legally in this country, and to continue to commit crimes. But underlying that is a real threat to due process protections to people who are in this country lawfully or otherwise. And that vote was a real missed opportunity to check this administration right at the beginning.
Yeah, and so along with that, like one of the things I remember when in 2018, what you call it, I lived, so like I said, I lived in New York. Joe Crowley he was looking like he was going to be the next Speaker of the House one day, and AOC ran, and I remember interviewing her for my newsletter back in the day and asking like, we can talk about like critique of power, but specifically policy, right? There's some things like it's not so much what we would like vote for, but like what we push for, right? Because there's a lot of things that like don't come up in Congress unless people really work to make them happen. And so I'm curious, there's a lot of stuff on, I know Boston's really expensive to live in, and affordable housing there. And so like, what are the things for you that you really see as like necessary for change there?
Yeah, right. Good. Well, we talked earlier about the need to kind of rebuild confidence in this government. We went right to the structural stuff, but the things that I think we need to do for people should be front and center, right, of the Democratic agenda. You went right to it, right? Affordability is just the biggest issue in this part of the country, right around Boston. It's becoming really, really hard for regular people to just live around here. I think that the first thing to do we need to do is to try to address housing, right? To try to make it, to try and improve the supply by building millions more houses across the country and reward communities that are thinking about housing the right way. Help people get those first down payments too. Childcare is one that you probably understand too, and I'm like kind of looking at right now. It is insane, like how much, and I don't understand if you're like a working, couple, how you're gonna put your kids into childcare if you don't have grandparents who can kind of help. So
It's crazy.
It's crazy, right? And then I just think there's so much more we could do at the federal level, partly to subsidize people to get into those centers, but also expand the supply of the centers and build more, right? Building more capacity. So there's a whole agenda of things that we could do as Democrats that we could prioritize that would show people, I think, that we really understand what they're going through right now. And look, the other thing we need to do on top of the structural stuff is kind of Trump-proof this government and make sure what's happening right now can never happen again, and rein in the power of the executive. Congress needs to kind of get its checks and balances roll back.
Yeah, the childcare is. I didn't really think about it too much before I had a kid, and
Yeah.
luckily we got 3K now in New York that is subsidized.
Yes.
You still have to pay for aftercare, which helps, but it's incredible that people are spending like $25,000 per year on that. It's more than some people make in a year. And,
It's $26,000 in Massachusetts is the average cost for center based childcare at the infant level. It's just it's unsustainable, right? It's driving people out of our state. It's a huge issue.
yeah, I think about that too. New York, people are leaving because of cost. And, it's amazing how, like, it's city used to be maybe affordable, but now it's kind of gone the opposite way. You think about, like, what are the things, is it a matter of, like, I don't know, I'm not sure what the industries are around you, but in terms of creating jobs and stuff, do you see there's like a federal responsibility or is it more of a local responsibility?
Childcare costs,
Or
you're
like,
saying?
job creation and things like that.
Oh, well, look, I mean, it's interesting. We have a close to full employment economy right now, right? Like if most people, if you can get a job, if you want a job, you can find one. Um, but like, first of all, that might not last forever, and AI is coming to threaten a lot of people's livelihoods. And second of all, those jobs don't pay enough to, support living in these communities because of how expensive they've gotten, right? And so, a lot of the growth in Greater Boston area is sort of healthcare sector related, education sector, right? Those are really important. But I think what the government could do is do more to support our communities, just to make things more affordable for people. That's things like infrastructure, right? We need a ton more of that in the Boston area, supporting the development of housing, subsidizing and supporting the creation of childcare opportunities, right? So that's how government can step in and really help. We're not going to be able to get everyone a job, although maybe in the future that will be our job, right? If AI really
Yeah.
comes in, that might be where we're headed.
Well, that to me, and I've read about this before. AI, I think it is like quietly the big. I thought in 2022 and 24, housing would be the big quiet issues. That like underscore
Yeah.
a lot of how people are anxious about what they are worried about economically. But AI, whether it's regulation or data centers or whatnot, is really, I think, going to be a defining issue. And
Sure.
it's not a neat partisan issue either. There's Democrats who are choosing
Yeah.
or
Right.
Democrats who are skeptical. Same thing on the Republican side. And so, like you said, you come from you're in a district with a lot of tech companies, I'm sure, universities,
Yeah.
healthcare, like, but yeah, there's a lot of people who are skeptical and nervous about it. So I'm curious to where you fall on that, on the line.
I mean, aren't you skeptical and nervous about
Yeah,
it too? I
right.
mean,
I'm screwed.
yeah, I mean, like, there's no way. I mean, they're amazing tools. It's an incredible technology. Of course, it's globally important that the United States continues to lead in the creation of frontier products. That's good for our country. That's good for democracy, right? It's going to be a problem if other countries start to exceed that, particularly China. But we can't let that be our North Star. Would lose sight of everything it's going to do to ordinary people's lives. There is a ton of uncertainty, right? And I think you have to start there and say, like, this is uncharted territory. We do not know exactly where we're headed. But I think there are some things that we absolutely must do, just basic safety regulations, particularly around children. I think that is some place we have to start. Um, right now, there just seems like we're about to repeat the social media experiment where there was like insufficient government regulation of access of minors to the technology. So that's a starting point. And then we need to head off the absolute worst outcomes that can happen if people use those tools to create weapons, or the tools become uncontrolled, things that can create cyber attacks. So on both sides of that, I think there's some things we can all kind of agree on. And then, we're just going to fight about the middle part like we always do, right? And I think states need to have a voice in that. I think Democrats need to kind of be creative and thoughtful about it. Data centers too, right? I mean, I don't know that we need to stop data centers forever, but we do need to make sure that when they're coming into communities, we're taking consideration of environmental factors, thinking about who's living in that community, and have some regulatory framework for how those are going to get built. And if it sounds like I don't have all the answers on that, you're right. It's
Yeah,
like,
no, what makes me worried is that the people that are running these companies are just absolute sociopaths. You know what it is? It's like
you
it's
think
not like
so?
like Sam Altman was like, it takes all you have to feed AI. It takes a lot of energy, but so do children. And like, you probably shouldn't say that out loud, Sam.
Yeah.
And he's probably one of the least of the crazy ones. But I think that's part of the thing that scares, I think, a lot of people, this idea that, like, it's not just that it's not, it doesn't feel like responsible people that are running these things. It doesn't feel like
Well,
people who
we're
are like
handing.
the
It's
best of
just
mankind
yeah.
in
Well,
mind.
it's just like more. It's just arguably more powerful technology than we've ever really seen, and it's being really quickly concentrated in the hands of a really small group of people. And that's just a dangerous recipe, right? That's something that could really go wrong. And so I think people are rightfully starting to get a little skeptical about the downside risks associated with that industry. Even if it's true that there's some amazing innovation happening, we need to be kind of thoughtful about where this is headed.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I was gonna say as a writer, as someone who does creative things, it's really, really scary in a way. But
Yeah,
I think about it a lot, like, is it like the next, free trade, right? That sort of thing, where it feels like
yeah,
that's the thing you embrace. It's sold. Oh, we're told, oh, this will create a lot of white collar jobs, and then maybe it doesn't, right? So I
yeah.
think there's fears there too.
Well, Senator Mark, I've been thinking a lot about this, and Senator Mark Kelly has a really interesting proposal out there that is, one of the ones that I'm like most focused on. And he has this idea of a small amount. You basically tax the insane amount of profit that these companies are going to make in the coming years, and you create a fund that's really dedicated to helping displaced workers and reinvesting back into the economy. And I think there's something there. I think that that might be the kind of approach that makes a lot of sense in terms of mitigating the economic impact of AI on workers. And the labor unions have actually been really thoughtful about this too, right? Like really thinking ahead about what this is going to mean for the workforce.
Yeah, I know the AFL-CIO had put out stuff about like how to do it responsibly, which
Yep.
is feels like a productive way of talking about it.
Yeah.
I think a lot about how, if you are to, lose your job because of it, then all of a sudden you don't have healthcare too. It's just sort of this like cascading thing in the United States.
Right. That's this country, right? And so, that's those are the kinds of conversations that I think we're going to increasingly need to have.
Yeah, and so what in terms of healthcare, like where are you on the, the public option, Medicare for all spectrum? I mean, all these things may not be possible as it stands right now. You're not going to go to Congress and all of a sudden pass Medicare for all. But what is your vision for that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I always start people with the contrast in this race where I'm running against the last Democrat who voted against the Affordable Care Act, and he's seems to have come around to it. I think when it became more popular, but there's not a lot of credibility in the opponent I'm running against. For me, it's absolutely a priority. I think, and the way I think about it is we need universal healthcare in this country. Right, like we should start with that statement. It's what all the other developed countries in the world have. It is, all those countries are able to provide healthcare for their citizens often at costs that are less than what we have. Medicare for all is a great starting point and a blueprint for getting there, but there's actually a lot of different things that we could try. And really importantly, I think that there's some stuff that we could do on the way to Medicare for all that really go at costs, right? Because that's what people are actually really contending with right now. I think things like just addressing the messed up stuff that happens with pharmacy benefit managers and captured corporate greedy kind of projects that happen inside the healthcare space. Like that is really what is causing a lot of harm to people right now. But we should keep pushing on and on and on and expanding out to a single payer system or a system like that provides everyone with a basic dignified level of care, I think.
Yeah, it's tough. I had heart surgery in November,
Oh,
and
sure.
yeah, and so I was really lucky. I have good healthcare, but you look at the hospital bills, and it was like I think it was like I mean I have to add it all up, but it's like over $500,000. And like hospital numbers are sort of fantasy, the way it work with. But it's remarkable that like we have a system that what happens if you don't have it, if you don't have that health
Well,
insurance.
we got, the healthcare app on one of our phones after my wife gave birth, like, a month or 2 ago. We got a notification, it was like, "Here's your share of the bill from the whole, like, pregnancy and childbirth thing." And it was, like, an insane life-ending number. And then they
Yeah,
were like, "Oh, sorry, just kidding, like, that's the part the insurer's picking up, never mind." But it was like, "Whoa, oh my god," like, thank God that I'm on her insurance right now, right? Like, I'm
right.
part of this campaign. Thank God that we have some kind of care. And the Affordable Care Act's done a lot, right? It kind of plugged some of those holes, particularly around childbirth. It sort of has to be covered now, and the exchange plans. But look, we've got a Republican Party that is actively trying to undermine all that right now, right, and try to take those plugs away and make sure that people are more exposed to private healthcare costs that could be totally life ending.
I think about how that's the sort of thing that 5, 10 years ago would have been like the story for the last however many months. There's subsidies expire,
Yeah.
10 million people lost their healthcare, but it feels like almost an afterthought with everything that's going on. And we maybe go to
Well,
Iran, war in
I was just
Iran.
gonna say Iran. Yeah, like, I'm like,
Yeah,
"Are we about to go to war?" And I worry, by the way, that he's gonna say something about that tonight at the State of the Union.
yeah,
Um, this flood the zone with bullshit. I don't know, sorry, can we swear on your thing?
yeah. Please.
Flood the zone with bullshit strategy, we need to build up some defenses around that, and it really does. It crowds out the space for what we wanna talk about in these midterm elections, which is how they are trying to make it just harder and harder for people to live.
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you're not running against Republicans. So it's a little bit different. You'll be running against a Republican if you win the primary, but you're not there
Inshallah.
yet.
Yes.
Um, right. Yes. And so, how do you like what? How do you? What are people most focused on? Right? Because there's so much going on. But when you talk to people, you talk to voters every day. I'm sure. Like, what are the things that they talk to you most about?
Yeah, and maybe I should. I don't know, I'm a first time politician, right? And so like maybe I should be doing this differently, but I don't think there's any difference between the message that I have right now in a Democratic primary and what we would run on, and it's a late primary here, so September to
Right.
November against a Republican. We got to rebuild confidence in our democracy. We got to get things done for working families so they feel like they can get by around in the Boston area. That starts with affordability, housing, childcare costs, healthcare costs, and it, also relates to fixing our system and getting money out of the system and doing term limits. I don't know, man. That's what I hear from everybody. It doesn't matter what their
Yeah.
partisanship is, right? And I don't particularly try too hard to parse what's your affiliation, right? Are you progressive? Are you conservative, right? In Massachusetts, a lot of that stuff kind of gets all mixed up. We have unenrolled people who vote in the primary, so it's not quite as sharp, I think, in some ways. So I lead with my story too. Like we didn't even
Yeah.
start there, but my mom's sort of from this area. She was born in Brockton, grew up raised by a single mom in Braintree, which is one of the communities just south of Boston. And, met my dad and they landed at IBM for a number of years. And that was sort of our middle class story. And, first got involved with Deval Patrick and got into politics because that story was not getting told much anymore. Just that basic, kind of boring, almost American dream story. And that is what we need to be running after and making sure that the next generation, like my daughter, is going to be able to live and enjoy, right? And like that to me, that's the core. Like that's what I want to share. That's why I ran. And it doesn't matter which kind of voter you're talking to.
And I think I was reading up on your biography. Your parents worked there for like 30 plus years at
Well,
IBM.
yeah, they were IBMers all the way through from like the 70s all the way through 30 plus years, that old kind of corporate America track.
That's incredible because I've had like 20 jobs in like the 20
Yeah,
years I've been out of
totally.
college.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And like you mentioned your daughter, like obviously there's certain things you'll discover and you'll learn. And like, I didn't know anything about the education system really until I had a kid. Why would I have to? Like, from the point of like graduating school to like now, why would I need to know anything? But like, I mean, she's only 10 weeks old. Congrats again. But like, how has that changed your perspective at all, if at all?
No, like, it wildly has, like, even already, and just becoming even just expecting a kid changes your perspective, and, like, when I started this campaign and we were talking about the need for fresh thinking and new leadership in the seat and a different approach than what we've been seeing in the past to the really serious problems of today, I was thinking about, like, us, right? Like, our community right now, people in Boston, people in this district, people in my neighborhood. But when you have a kid, it's different. You start thinking about, like, the next generation, and they're, like, kind of she's in your arms and you're like, what is she gonna live to kind of grow up to? What kind of country are we gonna hand off to her, right? And um that also like extends your horizon a little bit. It focuses you on the things that really matter. And it drives just kind of burns my passion more, I think, for trying to get this country to work again and get one that people can really believe in.
People say, "Are you saving for college yet?" My kid's 3, and I'm like, "Yes, technically
Yeah.
I am. We're putting money away every month, little by little." But also, it's hard to imagine what the country's gonna look like in
Yeah.
15, 16 years,
Yeah.
versus the way it is now. I feel like where our parents, like, could kinda have an idea of the way things would look when we got to that point, but, like, will there be u public universities? Will there be private universities? Will anyone have the money to go? What will they cost? I mean, will they be, like, $200,000 a year? It's hard to even fathom what the future will look like.
Well, a few things. Yeah. First of all, totally agree for sitting in these shoes, and my wife works in education and I'm always like, should we like do one of those 529s or something? And she was like, college isn't going to exist by then. Don't worry. It's like, okay, that's news to me, but okay. But yes, I mean, first of all, there's just a ton of uncertainty in the education field, but everywhere. Right. And I think people really get that. And if you look at the line of college tuition and where it's gone, public and private, it's like, that's just unsustainable, right? Like, it can't just keep going up and to the right that far. Like, no one in the country gonna be able to afford it, right? And so, there has to be some kind of reckoning there. I do think the federal government needs to be more active in putting pressure on the colleges and universities and justifying the, tuition increases that seem to just go up in lockstep, like, that needs to change, and we need to encourage, like lift up and build more alternatives to that 4-year degree institution, right? Like it can't just be that we've valorized it to a degree that I think is unhealthy. There's all sorts of great options for young people who are getting out of high school to participate in the economy. That might even become more of a thing the more AI takes over, right? And these kind of knowledge economy jobs change a lot, or the associate's degree could really matter a lot more for people, and that could be a good thing.
Yeah, it's funny because Boston is such a college town too, and so imagine
Yeah.
that's an issue that matters there more than anywhere else.
Yes, it's true. I mean, it is. I mean, but like, look, people who are administrators at like BU still need to send their kids to college, right? So like everybody understands that this thing is not working very well for people. I think the universities get it too. I think to varying degrees, right? And really are trying to change.
There's like we've talked about a lot. Like there needs to be big structural changes, as I guess your Senator Elizabeth Warren likes to like to say, big structural changes. And so, just kind of quickly, like in terms of what you would like to see changed, big things. We talked about housing a little bit. We talked about universal healthcare, but are there things that like you would get there where you kind of make like special projects for yourself that maybe people wouldn't think about too much?
Um, I we've talked about a lot of them. I really do care about housing, childcare, and some of those kind of core issues. I think that matter for my district. There's some district things that are just very kind of idiosyncratic that are very
Yeah, I'm
important
curious
too.
about that.
Yeah, like waterfront coastal resiliency is huge. We've got like the Atlantic is encroaching increasingly along this district, and it's really exposed to that in the harbor. Kind of Hingham, Hull, Quincy, all these communities leading up to the Boston waterfront. So there's just a ton to do there, and I think we're not being very well served by the current member. So I've been very focused on that, meeting with those communities. The same as and similarly, there's big work we can do in some of our wetlands cleanup. Right, there's just some we've cleaned up the harbor in Boston. We paid a little less attention to the Neponset River, the Fore River. There's work to do there. I think you can do it in partnership with the communities. This is a bit, I'm getting a bit in the weeds here, but part of the
No,
job
please.
is like pretty in the weeds, right? And like
Yeah,
there's just some big
I like it.
projects that I care about. And look, this is a little more amorphous, but part of the project of this campaign, and if I were to serve, would be doing this job in a way that reflects our communities better and is not so tied down to this old vision of a particular kind of um, person who lives in the South Boston kind of region, right? It's become a really diverse place. There's lots of Chinese Americans in Quincy. There's lots of Haitian Americans and Cape Verdeans in Brockton. There's young people. There's old people. There's students, right? And like, I just want to embrace that and make sure they all feel like they are being heard and welcomed into the policymaking space.
Yeah, one of my good friends is from Quincy, and he said like he taught the way he described it is like there is it's an interesting like he said a lot of his friends and like he's a little older than me, but a lot of his like guy friends, especially from back home, they became very Trumpy and very MAGA. It's like not quite as like liberal and lefty as you might think.
That is a fair statement about Quincy. It's a
Yeah,
changing community, and they have lots of. It's a very proud community, lots of traditions. So I spent a lot of time in Quincy. I love it a lot, actually. But yeah, there's like there's kind of conservative people. There's like super liberal people. It's a bit of a mix. But it's if you were just to look at it and think like, oh, that's a blue Massachusetts city. No.
right. Yeah, and that's interesting to me. This idea that like we think of Massachusetts as a monolith, and Boston is like a monolith, right? That it's blue, but that's it's I think in some ways like a microcosm. Like we've seen a lot of young men shift or middle. I like to think of myself as a young man, 39. People in the 30s, 40s, men especially shifting to the right to some degree, and like how much do you think that is a matter of just like the same old state leadership? Like if there was a younger representatives, would that change things? Like for your living there, what do you see?
Yeah, I think that I think about this a lot. I do think that there was, especially in 2024, which is where we saw that big shift.
Right.
There was a real dissatisfaction with what the Democrats were offering, a real sense that they were not listening. They weren't particularly open to new ideas. They were sort of just running on a "we're not Trump" platform, and they kind of put up the same couple people they've been putting up for a long time, right? I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think we need to do a lot to earn back trust in a lot of different communities, including among young men, but all sorts of different communities, including non-white communities where we traditionally had overperformed, right? And I do think that had a lot to do with the sclerotic, kind of enfeebled Democratic Party we've seen at the national level, and maybe some idiosyncratic things that happened in 2024 that won't repeat, hopefully. And I think trying to push this party to be more exciting to people, be more responsive to their concerns, be a little more fucking pissed off about the
Yeah.
country and showing it, right? And like really like acting on that principle and not kind of caving at the last minute. I think that's the path forward, and that's how you address some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think too much more of your time, but you think about Democratic leadership in Congress and the Senate right now, and you don't know how much they've taken that to heart. I think I read something today that they are trying to maybe like whip against a Iran War Powers Act, to try and prevent Trump from reining him in. And so I'm curious, something like that, like where would you be on somewhere like that? Like, was it something you'd buck the party on or buck leadership on in terms of trying to rein in the president's ability to go to war with Iran?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I mean, there's been a lot of budget fights in the last year about, right, to what degree are we going to exert what little leverage we have in the minority to prevent, to sort of stand in the way of real of the budget getting funded, and serve as a check on the administration, particularly because of the immigration enforcement. Look, I'm not a fan of shutting down the government, but like we need to stand up for our communities and we need to make a point. We need to exercise the little bit of power that we have. We should not, for example, have traded away in advance all of our leverage over DHS funding so we can go like argue over whether there should be masks on people on ICE officials, right? Like, the strategy that they've seemed to employ here just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. And so I guess I'm of the camp that would not be so interested in collapsing whenever the slightest wind gets comes along.
And so, kind of last question for you. So, like again, you have until September, right? The primary's not until September.
And
But like,
first.
what is it? So, what does it look like to build a campaign now, like these days? Like someone who's so entrenched, like, what are the building blocks, and what does a day by day look like?
Yeah, look, I mean, I started this campaign last May. So I quit my job. So I have full-time year and a half long campaign, right? And that was part of it. I was like, I think to really do this today, you need time, you need commitment, you just need to be able to be nonstop that entire time. And that's been true. I think it just requires a ton of effort. And we've, and it's yielded results, right? We've got a growing team. We've got endorsers. We've now raised the congressman, right? Like it's happening, and we're building this thing. On the day to day, it's tough, man. It's like a tough uphill thing. The best parts of it are the things you probably think about when you think about a politician. Going into a church basement and talking to 25 strangers, right? And taking questions. Like, oh, I just love it. The energy and like the challenge, like it's not always everyone loves you. Like, the friction of it is really, really rejuvenating. And the best part about this is that I've been able to kind of like do that on a random Tuesday night. That's been harder since having a kid, right? And
Yeah.
so now we're kind of figuring out how to piece all that together in this new life as parents, and it's a lot harder. But I guess my short answer is just like it's just a lot of sweat and hard work, and getting confident in your message and being confident about delivering it, and caring about winning, but not caring about sculpting some perfect thing that everyone's gonna love. Just being out there and being authentic about what you think.
You think that is there? You think. Or we think about Zoran Mamdani, and he had those three things on his poster, right? Like free fast buses, free some rent, that sort of thing. Like the things that you would say the real bullet points for your campaign.
Yeah, everyone always wants me to do that. I probably
It's
should.
tough to do, right? It's
But
tough. It's
no,
tough.
I'm like not a perfect politician in that way because I'm always too long-winded, right? I don't know. It's sort of something like rebuild confidence in our country, um, make it possible for people to live around Boston, fix our politics so those things are possible to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of it, for me. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the incumbent. It really doesn't have anything to do with like the fight going on in DC. But those are the things that I'm trying to focus on.
It's the cynicism in right now.
What's that?
Just kind of like the cynicism. No one really believes in anything. Anything is possible.
It's you do get that. But there's also, I don't know, I think there is that, but there's a growing sense that after this, um, there's going to be some real opportunity for change.
Yeah.
And especially if we win in the midterms, like I think that there's some kernels of hope out there, right? That start to show up in that whatever this mess produces, we are going to get to build back something. Um, and that next thing might actually be really good. And it could be look a lot different than what we have right now. And that's exciting. That's a
So
real and I have to keep that in my heart, and I think we all need to hear that sometimes, and like we need to like embody that in our politics.
No, I mean, yeah, you worked for Deval Patrick, who had that kind of that sense of, being positive, that sense of like, well, what could come next. I can understand that. You worked in
Well,
the Obama
that's
White
very
House.
important to me, and I came up in that era of Governor Patrick and President Barack Obama, who I worked for too as a White House intern at the beginning. And I think we've lost some of that, understandably, because everything in our country has been so dark, but we can't completely lose that. Like, we have to be able to stand up for something and talk to people about what we want to do in an optimistic and positive way that's hopeful, essentially, for the country. You could do that with some blood in your mouth and, conscious of the fights you've gotten in along the way. But I just feel really strongly that that's got to be part of it. And I don't hear enough of it.
Well, let's hope we get more of it in the next couple of years. Good luck
Amen.
with both fatherhood. A lot of late nights ahead of you, but it's
Yes.
all worth it. And the campaign.
Great. Well, this is great, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
how can people find your campaign and donate and do all that good stuff?
Yes, please do. Well, can I type in the chat here? I can just type it just so people can see it.
Yeah.
PatrickRoath.com is the website. Come find us. You certainly can contribute there. Sign up to volunteer. Would love to see everybody. You can see by email too. Like, I'm always happy to talk to people. I'm not at all shy about that. Find us on Instagram, on TikTok. Really great to see everyone here. You got a good turnout for a weekday night. I love it.
Yeah, people. I think it's better. This is better than State of the Union. I think they'll leave here
That's great.
happier. Just don't go watch State of the Union. Just leave
Yeah,
here. Just enjoy tonight now. Okay, and stay on this good vibe.
that's great. Great.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Patrick.
Thanks, man. See you, everybody.